Hey there, Agile Imagine Dragons. I hope that isn't an intellectual property issue. Do you think I need to send Imagine Dragons some money when I mention them in the podcast? That's frightening. But welcome to another episode of Agile Bytes, the podcast sponsored by Integrity Inspired Solutions, where we build software in an agile manner day in and day out. We are talking about different ingredients to coming up with your own MVP, a loose framework, a loose process you can walk through, or at least inspiration for you to build your own. And today we are talking about the whole reason you probably started listening to this series to begin with, and that is feature selection. What features are going to make it in the MVP? How do you decide? This is where everyone jumps to, right? When you first start talking about a software idea and you start talking about MVPs, people fast forward straight to feature selection, right? That's what it's all about. What subset of features is the right subset of features to get out the door? And this is where a lot of debates about what really is and what really isn't an MVP tend to arise from. Do you include, all the features that go down a vertical slice? Do they go across horizontal? Or, is it a little bit of functionality in all the areas? Is it really deep functionality in one area? And, you have a lot of discussion about that. But this whole discussion becomes a lot easier if you've done the other things that we've been talking about. Right? So don't jump straight to feature selection. If you were looking at the list of podcast titles and you're like, this is the only one I care about, I got some bad news for you, because this is only going to work well if you've done the other things, specifically that you've outlined who your personas are and that you have picked a user journey, or, possibly maybe two, or in some extreme cases, maybe three. But make sure you've thought about that, because feature selection ultimately needs to be driven around this very thin line of delivering value, right? And if we've picked a user journey, we've got a model. We've got something that we can mirror in software that will deliver value that our user cares about, and hopefully will give us meaningful information about our hypothesis, right? And if you don't have a vision by this point, you might want to start talking about it. Like I said, visions sometimes are the very last thing that we finalize, but if you have a good idea of what that is, they really help in this process as well. So we've picked out a user journey or so, and now we have a sequence of steps, right? Some of which involve the software, some of which don't. What I like to do when I'm doing these workshops in person, you can do this on a Miro board as well, is I will write these steps on pieces of construction paper and tape them to the wall in a line. Pretty high up, because I'm going to do some stuff under them, but that's sort of our linear map of the user journey. And if it branches, then I will branch the trail of papers, or whatever, but I will put those things up there. We sequence them out. And now you want to look at that, and you want to look at the steps that your software is going to be an active participant in. Which of those steps is your software going to facilitate, right? And what you want to do is under that step, or associated with that step, whatever tooling you're using, if it's a Word document, do some bullet points, hit the indent, whatever. You're going to want to come up with features or epics. I'm not really concerned about user stories at this point, but sort of the high level functionality that will be needed to facilitate that step. Okay. It is okay at this point, because you're just kind of brainstorming. We're not narrowing anything down yet per se. It's okay to put wish list stuff in there. It's okay to think about things that are not capabilities that people have today. It's okay to put those things in there. Some of them are not going to make the cut. That's okay. But don't feel like you have to limit yourself. We're not weeding out yet. We're not reducing down to the MVP yet. So just go wild. Think of all the features that it would be cool to have to support that particular part of the user journey. Okay. So now you've got all these things. I like to put them on cards or sticky notes and put them on the wall underneath their respective parts of the user journey. Now, for each one of these things, I want to rate them high, medium, or low on business certainty and technical certainty. When I'm doing this workshop in person, I have the people actually go up to the wall and write the business certainty score in one corner and the technical certainty score in the other corner. And we're looking at high, medium, or low, or if you want to use numbers, 1, 2, 3, whatever. But 3 differentiators that go in a sequence like that. The business certainty score comes from how well do we understand this feature from a business standpoint, from the underlying business that it's supposed to model in the software, right? Do we understand it real well? Do we have widespread agreement? If I sat down with someone today, could they give me user stories and acceptance criteria around it? How well do we really understand this and could supply the business knowledge side of it? If you are highly certain we got this pretty well figured out, again, from a business standpoint, not thinking about the technology side yet, but strictly from the business rules, what's going on, we all have a common understanding of this. Is it high? Is it medium? Or is it low? It may be something that the business has never done before, right? Or it may be something that everybody does a little differently or something like that, right? So there might be low certainty, but you need that score. The technical certainty side is when we build this feature, how certain are we about how to build it? Have we done this before? Are we all ready to go? Do we know the tasks that would need to be done to get this done? Is there anything about this that we've never done before or is kind of unknown? Or we might have to do some research before we really understand technically how we would accomplish this thing. So you rate it on technical certainty. If you're ready to go, like if I gave you a user story and acceptance criteria, you are ready to break into subtasks and hit the ground running, and you know exactly what you're going to do and all the pieces that you're going to need. That's high certainty, right? Especially if you've done it before. Low certainty is like, hey, not only have we never done this before, I don't even really know how to do this, right? We're going to have to do a lot of work to even figure out how we're going to get this particular feature done if we did it. So now each card has a business certainty score of high, medium, or low, and a technical certainty score of high, medium, or low. I do this for all the cards that are on the wall. And like I said, have the business people do the business score, have the technical people do the technical score. Just let them do it. Just let them go up to the wall, let them talk, let them debate, let them work their magic. You sit back, take a nap, play cards, whatever you're going to do. So they're going to do that, and eventually all the cards are going to have those scores on them. So any card that doesn't have a high score in either of those categories, or maybe medium, anything below that, there's not a high and it's not medium, you can probably disregard those features. They are probably not going into the MVP. The only exception would be if one of those cards that you eliminate is absolutely 100% necessary for the user journey to progress. And I mean, be rigorous about that. Like, it is 100% necessary. If we don't have this thing in there, there is no possible way on planet Earth with the state of technology that exists today that the user could possibly get that step done. If that's the case, then go ahead and leave it in there. But if it's not, anything doesn't have a high on it and it's not medium, you can just pretend those cards don't exist for a while, right? Now, we may put those in a backlog. We may add them to a document so we can keep track of them for later. They're probably not going into the MVP. So now what I want to do with the people who are left, the cards that are left, is I'm going to color code these guys. If both scores are high, those are green. If one score is high and one score is medium, those are yellow. Everything else is red. Okay, this will come into play later. So we're not saying what's going to get done and what's not going to get done. We're not saying what's going to make it in and what's going to get cut yet. But what you have when you've done this is now you have a risk map. Okay, you can look at all your features that are currently under consideration, and you can see where is the high risk, where is the low risk, right? And that may inform the features that you decide to keep in and keep out. I've done this many, many times, and in every MVP we put together, there's always some red cards that make it in, and that's fine. Like I said, right now we're not cutting anything, but now you're starting to get a map of where you're going to have an easy time and where you're going to have a rough time, right? And when we're trying to get an MVP out the door as quickly as possible, if there's something that's going to give us a rough time and it maybe isn't mission critical, that might be a good candidate to cut, right? So now we've created this risk map of our cards. The next thing that I like to do is to give each card 3 scores, or a score in 3 categories: business value, user delight, and technical effort. And, I give those a score between 1 and 3. And if you're doing this in person, you can do fun stuff, like you can use icons, right? Like hearts for the user delight, or dollar signs for the business value or something like that. But in each of those three categories, I want to give each of them a score between 1 and 3. They might all be 3s, they might all be 1s, they're probably going to be some kind of combination. And again, let everybody go up there and start filling them out according to their expertise, right? We want the technical people to be the loudest voices on technical effort. We want the business people to be the loudest voices on business value, and probably meet in the middle somewhere when we're talking about user delight, right? User's experience. And it's important that we are thinking about these as separate things, right? Because a feature that has a lot of value to the business, a user may or may not get excited about it, right? Like, if I'm writing software and under the hood, it performs a very complicated calculation, that used to take, an underwriter hours, and it performs it in 15 minutes. Well, maybe it delights the underwriters, maybe not, but probably not too many people are going to get super excited about that, right? Whereas, if I have something like, I can preview a form just by moving my mouse over the name, right? Like a user might get super excited about that, right? Oh, that's so cool. Oh, that'll be so helpful. But from a business value standpoint, probably not, right? Like you could still get the business value of your feature without like a form mouse over preview, right? I'm not going to tell this story now for the interest of time, but I have a very funny story about deciding about business value in this workshop. So hit me up sometime, or if you see this on LinkedIn, hit me up in the comments and maybe I'll share it there. But business value, how much value does the business get out of the feature? User delight, how much do users get excited that this is in there? And technical effort, how hard is it, or how much effort does it take to build? Okay, so obviously 3 is going to be on the high end, 1's going to be on the low end of all those things. So once you've done that, when you did the certainty scores, you were creating a risk map. But now you've also created a value map. Now you can look at the cards and you can see where are the high numbers, right? Where are the low numbers? Or if you've used icons, which cards have lots of icons, which cards hardly have any icons, because this will factor into your decision, right? If there's a feature that has low business value, low user delight, and high technical effort, guess what you don't want to do? That one, right? Especially for your MVP. So now we see where our risk is in terms of our certainty. We see where our value versus effort equation is with each of these cards. And they're all relatively sized, of course. So now I've got all these cards on the board. They've got colors and they've got scores or groups of icons or whatever. So now what I want to do is organize these features into sequential groups, which may become the sequence in which we produce them as software developers, maybe not, but I want to organize them into groups. And the groups, of course, have rules. I hope you have a pen with you or you're looking at a transcript of this podcast, because there's a lot of them, but they're pretty small. One is each group will have 1 to 3 features in it. Okay, no more than 3 for sure. Okay, 1 to 3 features in it. Each group can't have more than 1 red card. Each group must have 1 green card. A group cannot exceed 5 in total effort across all the cards. A group must have at least 4 total business value and 4 total user delight across the cards that are in the group. So those are the rules. So what you do is you group these features often into groups of 3, but sometimes the rules won't let us do that. And so they'll be in groups of 2 or occasionally groups of 1. And I like to keep these groups loosely sequential, right? Like in terms of priority, right? In terms of the way a user might go through the process, just kind of think about like if you were going to build these things, in what order would you want to see them, right? As the business, and what order would you want them demoed to you? So we tend to put like our riskiest stuff at the top or our highest value stuff at the top. The stuff that's most important to the user journey ends up at the top. But that's what the groups look like, right? Each group follows those rules. Now you don't have to use those rules. You can use different rules. Heck, you don't even have to use the scoring system, right? This is just what I do. You can come up with your own stuff. But what I'm trying to do is, as we think about these cards, what I'm trying to do is not get us into a high effort, high risk slog when it comes to the development, right? The more we develop, the more certainty we will have and the less risk we will have as we go. So I'm trying to control that, right? With these groups, I'm trying to make sure that none of these groups are especially risky. I'm trying to make sure that at least one thing in the group, we're going to knock it out of the park, right? Get those endorphins going, learn some things, but learning it in the safest way we can. And I want to make sure that the groups that we're putting out are going to be valuable, both valuable and that users are going to like them. Now, these groups, you may choose to use them in various ways, right? You may choose to use these groups to sequence out the development and delivery of this MVP. You might choose to use these groups for sprints, right? Each group is a sprint, or each group is a week, or something like that, right? Each week or each sprint, this is going to be the focus, is getting these things done. And that way we're making sure we're getting valuable things out the door. There's all kinds of ways you can use these groups. All I'm trying to do is just sequence out these features in a way that sort of controls our risk and strikes a nice balance between effort and value. And we want the good stuff to come out first, right? So then when you're looking at this sequence, you want to identify the point in the sequence where you will have meaningful information about your hypothesis. My experience has been that most organizations, if you've really been good about educating them and taking them through this process, identify that point somewhere around the first third or so of the whole list. It's not always that way, right? Depending on what the thing is and how the MVP is meant to be used to get information, it's not always that way. I'm just kind of giving you an idea. Most organizations will identify somewhere around the first third, say, once we get here, once we've developed these features, we can now start getting meaningful information about our hypothesis. If that's true, you just defined your MVP. That's the features that are going in right there. Okay? And because most organizations will identify this point early on in the sequence, you might have already planned out MVP number 2, right? Or iteration number 2 or iteration number 3, right? If you want to, right? You've got the raw materials there already ready to go. I have often been surprised, actually, at where organizations identify this breakpoint, because you would think most of them would want everything, right? Oh, we got to have all of this in there. That's actually not usually the case. Again, if you've really done a good job of educating people, getting them to think about this MVP is to give us information about this hypothesis. If we build out to what point, where could we start seeing if our hypothesis was correct or not? And then you'll find most groups will identify it pretty early on, especially if you encourage them to do that or help them, do that. Ask questions like, could we really not get that information without this feature? Good things like that. So once you've done that, those are your features. Now, that's a lot of stuff, right? And you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, there's math and you're adding numbers and you got all these rules about colors and numbers and whatnot. Folks, all those things are tricks. All those things are gimmicks. They are gimmicks that exist to get people having the conversations that they need to have so that they can make the decisions they need to make about this MVP. It has them focused on the right things, talking about the right things, and using the right criteria to decide what goes in the MVP. If you don't like the rules, if you don't like the colors or the scores, if you don't like the categories I use, don't do it then. Do something else. Do something on your own. It doesn't matter. They're just tricks. There's nothing magic about them. There's nothing official about them. It's not the professional integrity trademark TM, way things absolutely have to go. But it's a way to drive those discussions. It's a way for business people and technical people to get their arms around common languages and see in a visible way and a relatively sized way where these things stand so that you can start making good decisions. What's risky? What isn't? What's valuable? What isn't? What do our users want? What do they don't? What's hard to develop? What's easy to develop? These are all important factors when you're thinking about what goes in and what goes out. And putting them in the sequential groups according to those rules, make sure that you get a really healthy balance as you are pushing these increments out. So just think of it as a way. If you don't care for it, I'm totally cool with that. Come up with your own thing. Maybe some of these ideas give you inspiration for things that you might want to do. I'd love to hear about what you're doing that's working well. This is what I do. And by the time you're done, you've got a map of your risk, you've got a map of your value, and you have a sequential plan for getting the MVP out the door. Thanks everyone for listening to Agile Bites. Agile does sometimes bite, but we don't think it always has to. If you enjoyed what you heard today, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you happen to be using. And if you can, leave us a comment because we'd love to hear your feedback. What things would you like to hear about? What things did you hear that were valuable to you today? You can also head over to integrityinspired.com to sign up to our email list. But that's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time.